It was a night that would change everything. Logan's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he fought against the storm, his body aching from hours of emergency calls. His truck swerved through the rain-soaked road, headlights struggling to cut through the downpour. The rhythmic swish of the wipers barely kept up as the storm raged on, blurring everything ahead of him. "Almost home," he muttered, exhaustion pulling at his every nerve. But as he neared a familiar bend on Highway 16, something unusual caught his eye. A small dark shape lay on the side of the road, barely visible against the dark asphalt. Logan squinted, his instincts from years of rescue work kicking in. He didn't hesitate. His foot slammed on the brake. He had to check. In an instant, the truck was pulled over, and Logan stepped out into the storm. Rain soaked through his shirt, but he barely noticed. His flashlight beam cut through the thick darkness, landing on a tiny shivering ball of fur. A puppy. Logan's heart clenched. This wasn't just any puppy. It was weak, its fur plastered to its tiny body, looking more like a drowned rat than a dog. Slowly, the puppy lifted its head, letting out the weakest, most fragile whimper Logan had ever heard. He crouched down, his voice soft, comforting. "Hey there, little one. You're gonna be okay." He wrapped his jacket around the trembling creature, holding it close to his chest as he carried it back to his truck. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, a rapid rhythm that matched the puppy's, faint, fragile. He turned up the heat, hoping to warm the tiny creature, trying to calm both their racing hearts. "You're safe now," Logan murmured, glancing down at the little bundle. "We'll get you checked out in the morning. The vet opens at 8. "I know, because Eddie's always complaining about their early rush." He drove through the storm, his mind racing, but all he could focus on was the shivering pup in his lap. The uncertainty. The need to help. Once home, Logan carefully placed the puppy in his bathroom, gently drying it with the softest towel he could find. Beneath all that drenched fur, he noticed how small and fragile it really was. Its eyes barely opened, but when they did, Logan was met with a gaze so warm, so full of life. "This little guy's a fighter," he whispered to himself as he worked quickly, preparing a safe spot for the puppy to rest. He laid out some old blankets near the heater, creating a nest. The puppy immediately curled into a tight ball, still shivering slightly, but finally starting to relax. Logan sank onto the couch, exhausted but unable to tear his eyes away from the tiny creature. "Where did you come from?" he wondered aloud, his mind spinning with questions. Was there a family out there searching for this little one in the storm? He closed his eyes for a moment, drifting off into sleep. But just as he was about to fully rest, a sound jolted him awake. A tiny chirping sound. Not a bark. Almost like a bird's call. Confused, Logan sat up, his gaze snapping toward the makeshift bed he had created. The puppy was stirring, no longer lying still, but moving in strange fluid motions. It looked more like a cat stretching than a dog. Logan's brow furrowed. What was going on? With a sigh, he rubbed his eyes. Just tired. Must be the storm messing with me. But then he heard it again. The chirping sound, coming from the puppy's bed. It was unsettling, different. Logan moved carefully, not wanting to startle the small creature. He went to the kitchen, grabbed some water and some turkey from the fridge. He set them down near the puppy, hoping it would eat. But the little one only sniffed, then turned its head away. "Come on, buddy," Logan murmured. "You need something in you." Then, with a hesitant movement, Logan dipped his finger in the water and offered it to the puppy. This time, the response was immediate. The tiny creature eagerly lapped at his fingertip, its tongue darting out for every drop, as if starving. Logan smiled softly. At least he's drinking. But then the puppy's eyes met his again, huge dark eyes that seemed too aware for such a young animal. There was something about the way it looked at him. Something wasn't right. Logan froze for a second, unable to shake the odd feeling. He couldn't explain it. But the way the puppy was watching him, it didn't feel normal. He pulled out his phone and started searching, typing in "caring for abandoned puppies" and scrolling through various sites. But nothing seemed to match what he was experiencing. The puppy was getting stronger, moving more confidently across the floor. Its legs seemed unusually long. And when it stretched, it moved with an eerie grace, more like a predator than a puppy. Logan tried to ignore it. "It's just growing pains," he told himself. But deep down, the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. The next morning the puppy, now named Rusty, was already up and exploring. He moved with surprising agility, darting around the house like a wild animal, his ears swiveling at every sound. But Logan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a stray puppy. Was it possible that Rusty wasn't really a dog? Logan's mind raced. As he watched Rusty move around the room, those strange predatory movements, so unlike a puppy, he couldn't shake the growing unease that had settled in his stomach. What was going on with you, little guy? The day had started like any other, but now Logan's thoughts were scattered. The puppy's odd behavior was becoming impossible to ignore. There was something about Rusty that felt wrong. He wasn't a normal dog, that was clear. But was it possible? Could it be true? Could this creature, this thing he had rescued, be something else entirely? He stood in the living room, staring at the small ball of fur. Rusty was sniffing around, his nose twitching like a predator hunting, as though he could smell something Logan couldn't. His eyes, dark and unblinking, tracked every movement in the room, as if he understood everything. Logan's hand trembled as he reached down to pick up his phone. He searched for puppy behavior, strange puppy movements, but nothing came close to explaining what was happening in his home. The list of symptoms, no interest in food, the strange chirping sounds, the way Rusty seemed to prefer the shadows, only made Logan's skin crawl. No, this isn't happening. He had to know for sure. He had to find out what Rusty really was. That night, when the house was quiet, Logan decided to go for a walk. He clipped on the leash, trying to act normal, but inside, his mind was racing. Rusty trotted beside him, moving with the silent grace of a wild animal. A dog doesn't move like that, Logan thought, his heart sinking with each step. As they reached the park, Logan's unease only grew. Rusty had tensed up, his body rigid as he stopped in his tracks, eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the path. Logan's grip tightened on the leash, but Rusty tugged forward, pulling at the restraint like he wanted to run into the darkness. No. Logan murmured. Not tonight. But before he could pull Rusty back, the puppy, if that's what it was, turned and looked at him. Logan froze. There was something in those eyes. Something otherworldly in the way they reflected the streetlights. Then, Rusty opened his mouth, letting out a sound that was anything but a bark. It wasn't even a growl. It wasn't a yelp. It was a high-pitched, eerie chirp, like something from the forest, something that didn't belong in a suburban neighborhood at midnight. Logan's heart pounded. He tightened his grip on the leash. We're going home. But Rusty wasn't listening. The little creature wasn't following commands like a normal puppy. He was pulling away, moving toward the darkness with that strange predator-like determination. Logan finally managed to tug him back and made his way home. But as they walked, Logan's mind kept flashing back to that moment in the park. The chirp. The way Rusty had looked at him. Those eyes. What had he really rescued? Back at home, Logan couldn't sit still. He felt the weight of the mystery bearing down on him. What was happening to Rusty? What was he? The next morning, Logan stared at the puppy from across the room. Rusty was curled up, his tail wrapped tightly around him as if he was trying to hide something. He looked innocent enough, yet Logan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this creature than he could understand. Rusty's coat had changed, too. It was richer, darker. The red hue that had appeared over the last few days was now deeper, more vibrant. And his body was growing. But it wasn't growing like a puppy's body should. It was elongating, stretching into something sleeker, more agile. Logan's hand brushed over Rusty's back. The fur felt different. Thicker. Stranger. This isn't normal. But just when Logan tried to push the unsettling thoughts away, his phone rang. It was Eddie, his best friend from the firehouse. Hey man, I gotta ask, you sure that's a puppy? Eddie's voice had a playful edge, but there was something serious underneath it. Logan forced a laugh. What are you talking about? Eddie chuckled. Dude, I've been seeing that pup run around your place. I've never seen a dog move like that. Looks more like a raccoon than a puppy. Logan stiffened. A raccoon? Yeah, just messing with you, but seriously, that pup is weird. You should take him to the vet or something. Logan stared at the phone for a moment, the unease growing stronger. Eddie was right. Rusty's behavior didn't make sense. He wasn't acting like a normal puppy, not by a long shot. That afternoon, Logan found himself back at the vet's office. Dr. Patel, the veterinarian, greeted him with her usual smile, but even she couldn't hide the raised eyebrow when she saw Rusty. "Something's off, huh?" Logan asked, his voice tight. Dr. Patel ran her hands over the small creature, examining him carefully. "His coat, it's thickening. His legs are getting longer. And his eyes, there's something about them." She paused, thinking. "The behavior is unusual. He's not acting like a typical puppy." Logan swallowed hard. "What do you think it is?" The vet hesitated. "It's hard to say, but I'd recommend a genetic test. There are a few possibilities." Back home, Logan couldn't stop thinking about what Dr. Patel had said. A genetic test? What was she hinting at? But before he could make up his mind, Rusty let out that eerie chirp again. Logan's heart raced. He had to know. He had to find out what Rusty really was. The night fell slowly, and Logan found himself online, typing in the words that he was too afraid to speak out loud. Fox behavior. His hands trembled as he clicked through pages of information, his stomach sinking with each new detail. And then it hit him. The sounds Rusty made. The way he moved, graceful, fluid, like a predator. The nocturnal behavior. It wasn't dog behavior. It was fox behavior. Rusty wasn't a dog. The next day, Logan paced in his living room, waiting for the test results. His mind couldn't quiet itself. Every thought led him back to the same question. What was he supposed to do now? His eyes kept drifting to Rusty, who was curled up on the couch, his eyes fixed on Logan with an intensity that was unsettling. Logan couldn't shake the feeling that Rusty knew more than he let on. More than Logan was ready to face. He grabbed his phone and opened the email, staring at the subject line, DNA test results, sample number 2847. His heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The truth. He clicked it open, his fingers trembling. The screen loaded, and Logan's breath caught. It was right there, in black and white. 100% Vulpes vulpes. A red fox. Logan's world shattered. Rusty wasn't a dog. He was a wild animal. And the law was clear. Keeping a fox as a pet was illegal. What was he supposed to do now? What happened if someone found out? What if the authorities came and took Rusty from him? Logan couldn't even imagine the thought. He glanced over at Rusty, who was still lying peacefully, unaware of the chaos brewing in Logan's mind. For the first time, Logan wondered if he could keep him. If they would have to say goodbye. Logan sat frozen in his chair, staring at the DNA results on his phone. His mind was reeling. 100% Vulpes vulpes. A red fox. Not a dog. Not even close. But what did that mean? How had he ended up with a fox? It didn't make sense. He'd picked up a tiny shivering puppy on the side of the road. Nothing in his mind had prepared him for this. He looked over at Rusty, who was curled up on the couch, tail wrapped around himself, his bright eyes following Logan's every move. It was as if the little fox could sense Logan's every thought, every doubt. How long had Rusty been watching him? Logan shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his brain. It's just a mistake. This can't be real. But the test results, the way Rusty moved, the chirping sounds, everything lined up. Rusty wasn't just some quirky dog. He was something else entirely. The weight of it all crashed down on him. Logan couldn't let this happen. He couldn't just let go of Rusty, could he? He had already formed a bond with the little creature. A bond that felt unbreakable. Rusty was his now. How could he send him away to a sanctuary? Rusty didn't belong in the wild. He didn't know how to survive out there. Logan pulled his knees to his chest, the pressure of the situation tightening around him. What if Rusty wasn't meant for the wild? He was imprinted on humans. He didn't know how to be a fox. He'd grown up with Logan. He'd grown up in a world of warmth, of safety, of comfort. But the law was clear. Keeping a fox was illegal. If anyone found out, Rusty would be taken away. And that would be it. His fingers hovered over the phone again, torn between making the call to the wildlife sanctuary and doing nothing. Logan didn't know which option was worse. His mind was clouded with conflicting emotions, each one pushing him in a different direction. Suddenly, the soft chirping sound broke through his thoughts, pulling him from his spiral. Logan turned, his eyes meeting Rusty's gaze. There it was again, the same intensity, the same quiet intelligence. As if the little fox could read his mind, too. This isn't over. Logan stood up quickly, his feet pacing across the room. What was he supposed to do? The decision had to be made. But the longer he waited, the more impossible it felt. The more Rusty seemed to belong in this home, in this life with Logan. Rusty didn't deserve to be alone in a sanctuary. He was special. Something about him was different. He had brought something into Logan's life, something that couldn't be replaced. And Logan wasn't ready to let it go. But the law, was waiting. It would catch up with him eventually. And when it did, Rusty would be taken. He'd be forced into the wild. Or worse. The next morning, Logan went to work, but his mind was nowhere near the firehouse. It was stuck at home with Rusty, with the questions that had taken over his life. What now? The sound of the trucks and the chatter of his fellow firefighters felt distant. He barely noticed when Eddie came over, slapping him on the back and grinning. "Hey man, how's the weird dog doing?" Eddie chuckled, but Logan could see the concern in his eyes. "He's acting stranger every day, isn't he?" Logan nodded, eyes tired. "Yeah. He's different. A lot different. Maybe you should get a second opinion?" Eddie suggested, though he clearly wasn't convinced. "I'm no expert, but that thing doesn't look like a dog anymore." Logan sighed, rubbing his temples. "That's what I've been thinking, Eddie. But what do I do about it?" He wanted to ask Eddie for help, for advice, but he couldn't. This wasn't something he could explain. He couldn't tell him about the DNA test. He couldn't tell anyone. He couldn't risk it. Rusty was his responsibility now. When Logan got home that evening, he found Rusty in the same spot, curled up in his usual corner of the couch. But something was different. Rusty was staring out the window, eyes locked on the darkening street outside, his body tense. His posture was completely still, the only movement being the flick of his tail. Logan walked closer, his heart rate quickening. "What is it, Rusty?" The little fox turned to face him, then gave a soft chirp, his body still poised, alert. It was a sound Logan had come to associate with danger, or perhaps with warning. The same eerie chirp he had heard in the park. Logan bent down, trying to keep calm. "What's going on out there, buddy?" But Rusty didn't answer, didn't move. His eyes were locked on something just beyond Logan's sight, something in the night. Logan's pulse quickened. What is he seeing? Without thinking, Logan grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter and moved toward the window. His hands were shaky as he lifted the blinds, sweeping the beam of light over the street outside. The yard, the bushes. Nothing. But something felt off. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The air felt different, heavier, like something was watching him. Logan's grip tightened on the flashlight. He felt a cold chill run down his spine. It was then that he noticed something that made his stomach drop. Rusty had been looking at something across the street. A shadow. Not quite a person, but something darker. Something that didn't belong in the suburban quiet. Logan's heart began to race as he slowly, cautiously approached the door. The unease gnawed at him. But what was that shadow? What had Rusty seen? Could it be? No. It couldn't be. There was no way. Rusty had been acting strange for days, but this felt different. Something was out there, something that had caught his attention. And Logan had a horrible feeling he wasn't going to like what happened next. Logan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something bigger than he could understand. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, and the unsettling silence that followed Rusty's strange behavior only made everything feel worse. He paced around the living room, his mind spinning. He needed answers. The test had already confirmed it. Rusty wasn't a dog. He was a fox. A wild animal. But why was he so attached to Logan? Why did he seem more like a domesticated pet than an untamed creature? Logan glanced over at Rusty, who was still sitting by the window, eyes unblinking, locked onto something beyond the glass. His body was stiff, his tail curled tightly, as if preparing to pounce on something unseen. Rusty wasn't the playful puppy Logan had rescued anymore. This is getting worse. Logan stepped forward cautiously. "Rusty, what do you see?" The fox didn't respond, his eyes still fixed on the shadows outside. Logan could feel the weight of the moment, the tension building with every passing second. It was like there was a storm brewing, something on the verge of breaking. Without thinking, Logan moved to the door. He didn't want to, but he had to know. He couldn't keep sitting in this house, wondering what was happening. His eyes flicked back to Rusty, who was still eerily still. There was no sign of movement, nothing except those eyes. What could he see that I can't? Logan grabbed his flashlight and carefully opened the door, stepping out into the yard. The night air was cool against his skin, but it didn't calm the growing sense of unease in his chest. He walked a few paces, scanning the yard, but everything seemed normal, too normal. The kind of quiet that made your skin crawl, the kind of silence that felt like something was watching you. His breath came faster. He needed to know what Rusty was sensing. Turning back to the house, Logan looked up at the window where Rusty had been. The fox wasn't there anymore. Where did he go? Panic surged through Logan as he rushed back inside. He called out for Rusty, but there was no answer. His heart was pounding now. He was starting to feel the weight of something dark looming over them, a presence he couldn't explain. He moved through the house in a blur, checking every room, every corner. But the fox was gone. Rusty? Finally, Logan heard it, something scuffling in the dark. He rushed down the hallway, his feet nearly stumbling over each other in the frantic rush. When he turned the corner into the kitchen, his flashlight beam landed on a figure crouched in the shadows. Rusty. He was sitting by the back door, his body low to the ground, eyes gleaming in the dark. His posture was predatory, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. Logan stopped in his tracks, his chest tightening. There was something off about the way the fox was sitting. He was too still, too focused. Logan took a tentative step forward. Rusty. The fox didn't respond. Instead, his tail twitched, the only sign that he was aware of Logan's presence. His ears flicked, then turned toward the back door as if he was hearing something Logan couldn't. Logan swallowed hard. What was going on? The scratching sound was back, faint at first, like something small was moving just outside the door. Logan's heartbeat quickened as he stepped closer. He knew it wasn't just a random noise. Rusty was reacting to it, his body tense, eyes fixed on the door, ready for whatever was coming. The scratching grew louder, more urgent. And then, out of nowhere, a sharp low growl pierced the stillness of the night. It wasn't Rusty. It was something else. Logan's blood ran cold. His breath hitched in his throat as he glanced back at the fox. Rusty was still staring at the door, his eyes wide, pupils dilated. He let out a small chirp, barely audible, but Logan could feel the unease in it. It wasn't a sound of comfort, like it had been before. This time, it was something darker. Something warning. Something wasn't right. Logan hesitated, every instinct in his body telling him to close the door, to lock himself inside, to pretend he hadn't heard that growl. But the scratching continued. It wasn't going away. Rusty, Logan whispered, his voice shaking, "What is it?" Rusty let out a soft whimper, almost as if he understood. It was the first time Logan had heard that sound, a sound of fear, not defiance. The little fox's ears were back now, his body curled protectively. Logan took a deep breath and inched closer to the back door. He knew he shouldn't, but he had to know. What was out there? What had Rusty been watching all this time? Before he could reach the door, the scratching stopped. An eerie silence followed. Logan froze. What was happening? He stood there, unmoving, his heart racing, the tension unbearable. For a long moment, there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the night. But then, with a sudden rush, something slammed against the door, rattling the wood. Logan jumped back, his heart leaping into his throat. Rusty leaped to his feet, his tail high, his entire body trembling. His eyes locked with Logan's, as if warning him. That growl, it wasn't a random animal. It was something deliberate. Something watching, waiting. The door rattled again, this time harder. Then, with a sound that sent chills down Logan's spine, something started scraping along the bottom of the door, slow and deliberate, like claws against wood. Rusty whined low in his throat, eyes wide with a fear Logan had never seen before. What was out there? Logan's hand hovered over the doorknob, his mind screaming at him to open it, to see what was behind the door. But another part of him, the part that had been ignoring all the warning signs, knew better. Something wasn't right. Rusty chirped again, but this time it was frantic. His small body moved quickly, rushing to Logan's side. It was like he was begging Logan not to open the door. Logan's breath hitched as he glanced down at the fox. The urgency in Rusty's eyes spoke volumes. Whatever was on the other side of that door was far worse than he could imagine. But what was it? Logan stood there, paralyzed, his hand still hovering over the doorknob. Rusty's eyes never left him, wide with fear, his body trembling as if he were desperately trying to communicate something. It was as though the little fox knew the danger was imminent, but Logan couldn't understand why he was so terrified. The scraping on the door continued, but now there was something else, a low guttural growl. It vibrated through the floorboards, sending a chill down Logan's spine. It wasn't the soft chirping Rusty had made before, nor was it a sound from an animal in distress. This was something else entirely. Something was out there. Logan's breath hitched as he backed away from the door. But it was impossible to ignore the sensation gnawing at him, the pull to open it, to see what was behind that door. Everything in him screamed to stay away, to let whatever it was out there remain hidden. But his curiosity, the need to know, was unbearable. Rusty's never been this scared before. Another screech echoed from the other side of the door, followed by a long low scrape. Logan stumbled backward, his hand gripping the wall as if trying to steady himself. What is out there? Logan turned to Rusty, who was now standing near the window, ears pressed flat against his head, tail tucked low. The fox's gaze was fixed on the door, and Logan could feel the tension between them. The fox was trying to warn him, but Logan had no idea what he was supposed to do. Then, the sound stopped. Everything went silent. It was as if the world held its breath. Logan couldn't even hear the wind outside anymore. For a long moment, nothing moved. Not even Rusty. Logan's hand was still at his side, and his heart was hammering in his chest. His mind raced, trying to process everything. The strange behavior. The growling. The fear in Rusty's eyes. What is it that Rusty knows? He glanced at the door again, then to Rusty, who was now backing up slowly, his body low to the ground, like he was preparing to flee. A new sound broke the silence, a distant high-pitched chirp, almost like a call. Not from Rusty this time. It was coming from outside. The same chirp, but it's not him. Logan's body went cold. This wasn't a normal animal. Rusty wasn't just a wild animal, he was part of something bigger. Something that Logan had no understanding of. The mystery deepened, but so did the danger. And Logan could feel it closing in on him. Rusty let out a sharp yelp, his body jerking as if startled by something that was just out of reach. His ears perked up, then flattened back down, and he darted toward the back door. He didn't bark. He didn't even make a sound, just moved with a frantic energy that Logan had never seen before. His tiny paws were quick on the floor, his movement almost like a blur as he circled the door, looking for a way out. What the hell is going on? Logan's mind was spinning, but he couldn't ignore the urgency in Rusty's actions. It was as if the fox knew something was coming, and it wasn't something Logan would be able to stop. Logan stepped toward the door again, his breath coming shallow. He was torn. Part of him wanted to lock it, to keep whatever was outside out. Another part of him, though, was drawn to the mystery, to what lay behind that door. Before he could make up his mind, a sharp bang echoed from the door, followed by a screeching sound, metal scraping against wood. The door rattled violently in its frame, the noise nearly deafening. Logan jumped back, heart pounding in his chest. Rusty let out a piercing cry, his body launching toward Logan, instinctively seeking protection. The fox's eyes were wide, terrified, his mouth slightly open as he panted heavily. For the first time since Logan had found him, he looked completely out of control. This isn't just a fox. Logan's stomach turned. And then in the brief silence that followed, a soft, unnatural whisper reached Logan's ears, too faint at first, but growing louder. The sound seemed to be coming from right outside the door, a voice, a soft, low murmur that Logan couldn't understand. The language wasn't like anything he had heard before, yet it felt familiar. Strange. Rusty's fur stood on end, and he scrambled behind Logan, as if to shield himself from whatever was beyond the door. Logan froze. He wanted to turn around. He wanted to grab the phone and call for help. But something stopped him. Was this real? The whispering intensified, as if someone or something was waiting, right on the other side of the door, just out of sight. The scratching came again, but this time, it was almost rhythmic, synchronized. As if whatever was out there was trying to Communicate. Suddenly, there was another sound, louder, more distinct. A thud, then a scrape, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws tapping against the wood. This time, there was no mistaking it. It was coming closer. Logan's heart skipped a beat. The door rattled again, this time with such force it seemed like it might break off its hinges. Rusty growled low in his throat, a deep warning growl, and Logan could feel the air grow colder. What the hell is happening? He backed away from the door, his hand gripping the flashlight tightly. Rusty, now crouching low to the ground, didn't move. His body was tense, his fur bristling. He looked like a completely different animal than the one Logan had rescued that stormy night. There was something wild inside him, something untamed that Logan had never seen before. Logan's mind was racing. Should he open the door? What was out there? Was it connected to Rusty somehow? Or was it something entirely different? And then, for a moment, the whispering stopped. Logan held his breath. Had it gone away? But just as quickly as the silence came, the door exploded, not in the way Logan expected. It wasn't the wood breaking, but something slammed against it, pushing it inward, as if something were trying to get in, pushing from the other side with inhuman strength. Rusty let out a piercing, blood-curdling yelp, and Logan's eyes went wide in shock. The door buckled, and the noise was deafening. Then, with a final screech, the door swung wide open. But there was nothing. No creature. No sound. Just the empty space beyond it, swallowed by darkness. Logan stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. The door trembled. The house seemed to shake with the force of the impact, and Logan barely had time to process what was happening. The sound of the door slamming open violently echoed in his ears, and the fear he felt reached a level he never imagined possible. The silence after the final crash felt endless. But in that moment, something inside Logan snapped. He knew the answer was right there, in front of him. With his eyes fixed on the darkness outside the door, Logan took a step forward, unaware of what he was about to discover, but feeling an irresistible force pulling him in. He felt a growing heat in his chest. It wasn't the warmth of a safe home, but a burning heat, almost as if he were being consumed by something invisible. Something he had neglected. Rusty was still there, now completely paralyzed, his eyes glowing in the darkness like the headlights of a wild animal. He was no longer the same. It was as if something had possessed him, transformed him. He was no longer the helpless puppy Logan had rescued. He was a predator, and this predator was ready to reveal its true nature. Logan took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but his nerves were on edge. He knew he had to act quickly. But before he could take another step, something emerged from the darkness, so fast that Logan barely had time to realize what was happening. A huge shadow, a formless figure, passed through the open door, and the darkness seemed to close in around Logan like a net. His eyes widened in shock as he saw what was in front of him. It was a creature, part human, part beast, its appearance twisted, with eyes reflecting the same darkness that surrounded the place. A creature with skin so pale it looked more like cold flesh than living, and its body, a monster half-man, half-animal, seemed completely deformed. Logan stepped back, but what he saw next left him paralyzed. The creature stared directly at him, and its eyes, those eyes were the same eyes as Rusty's. Logan couldn't believe what he was seeing. The truth hit him like a hammer. The creature in front of him was Rusty, but no longer Rusty. He had transformed. The puppy Logan had rescued, the small helpless being, was actually something much older, more powerful, and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And it wasn't just an animal. It was an agent of something far greater, something Logan could never have understood until this very moment. Rusty, or what was left of him, stepped forward, his sharp teeth gleaming in the faint light coming from inside the house. He was no longer a puppy afraid of the night. Now, he was the night itself, the darkness itself. "You created me," the creature whispered, its voice a blend of many tones, both human and not, at the same time. "You freed me. And now you'll see." Logan dropped to his knees, the weight of the truth crushing him. He realized, with a cold shiver, that the creature was not alone. It was calling something. Or someone. The door slammed violently behind him, and in one swift, brutal movement, the creature lunged forward, its sharp claws cutting through the air with deadly precision. But it wasn't him that Logan saw last. It was Rusty. Or what was left of him. The small puppy Logan had rescued from the rain, now transformed into an otherworldly being, seemed to be watching Logan with a kind of remorse, or maybe a desire for revenge. As if he knew Logan's fate had already been sealed the moment he found him on that road. Logan felt an immense pain, as though all the air had been ripped from his lungs. He tried to scream, but his voice was swallowed by the sound of something he could no longer comprehend. It had all been a mistake. Everything. But before he could understand the full extent of what was happening, a cold, trembling hand gripped his shoulder. He didn't need to look to know who was there. It was Rusty. The last thing Logan heard was a chilling whisper. "You freed me. Now, you'll come with me." And then, the darkness took over everything.